Feeding a small town 3 meals a day is hard enough on dry land. Now put that entire town on a nuclear-powered warship in the middle of the ocean, take away every grocery store for 1,000 miles, and tell the kitchen it is never, ever allowed to close. That is the daily reality aboard a United States aircraft carrier, where a crew of around 100 cooks feeds some 5,000 sailors around the clock. The title says 10,000 meals a day, but on a big carrier out on deployment, the real number climbs closer to 17,000. And they turn them out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in a kitchen that can never shut down. Because a carrier may be the most powerful warship ever built, but even it runs on something simple. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a fourth meal you've probably never heard of. Here's how they actually pull it off. Stay with me. The floating city. Start with the sheer size of the problem. A Nimitz-class aircraft carrier is a genuine floating city, as many as 5,000 people living and working aboard, roughly the population of a small town. That's the ship's own crew, plus the entire air wing that flies from its deck. Pilots, mechanics, deckhands, and engineers. Every one of them hungry, but this town is parked in the middle of the ocean, sometimes for the better part of a year. And there is no grocery store, no drive-through, no delivery. Every single one of those thousands of people has to be fed several times a day. And because a carrier launches and recovers aircraft around the clock, there is no closing time. Put simply, if the crew doesn't eat, the ship doesn't fight. And it all begins hours before the sun comes up. While most of the ship is still dark and asleep, the breakfast crew is already awake, often up at 3 in the morning to start cooking. These are the Navy's culinary specialists, and they work brutal 12 to 16-hour shifts to keep the food moving. Step into one of their galleys and it looks less like a kitchen and more like an industrial factory. Steam kettles big enough to cook soup by the hundreds of gallons, banks of ovens baking dozens of trays at once, mixers the size of washing machines, and grills lined end to end with more than 100 pieces of meat searing at a time. In another corner, the ship's bakers have been at it even longer, pulling thousands of fresh rolls and loaves from the ovens through the night, because a crew this size goes through bread by the ton. And that's just to get breakfast onto the trays before the first shift stirs. But breakfast is only the opening round, the grocery list. Because the numbers behind all this are almost impossible to believe. In a single day, one carrier's cooks can burn through 1,600 pounds of chicken, 160 gallons of milk, 350 pounds of lettuce, 30 cases of cereal, and 20,000 cups of coffee. 20,000 every day. It reads less like a restaurant order and more like the weekly supply run for a small city. Feeding this floating city costs the Navy somewhere between $45,000 and $65,000 a day, well over $1 million a month on groceries alone. And it isn't as simple as cooking in bulk. The galley has to hit real nutritional targets, well over 2,000 calories a day for every single sailor, while working around food allergies and religious diets across a crew of thousands. And every ounce of it has to be cooked, served, and cleaned up in a kitchen that is quietly moving beneath their feet. Which brings us to that mystery fourth meal. The 4 meals and mid-rats. On land, we live by 3 meals a day. A carrier lives by 4. There's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then there's mid-rats, short for midnight rations. A full meal served in the small hours for the thousands of sailors working the night shift. Because on a carrier, some part of the crew is always on duty, and the flight deck never truly sleeps. That is the secret to the whole operation. The galley doesn't run in neat shifts with the kitchen going dark in between. It essentially never stops. And the cooks aren't feeding everyone in one giant hall either. A carrier has several separate galleys and dining areas running at once, feeding the enlisted crew on the mess decks, the senior chiefs in the chief's mess, and the officers in a more formal dining room called the wardroom, each in their own spaces. On some carriers, that means as many as 7 separate galleys, kept running by well over 100 culinary specialists working in relays. The newest Ford-class ships lean on more automation and fewer, larger galleys, but the mission is identical. Never stop feeding the crew. At peak meal times, lines of hungry sailors snake down the passageways, and the servers plate up thousands of trays in a couple of hours before turning around to start it all over again. And remember, All of this is happening on a ship at sea. Hamaryui, cooking in a storm, which adds the one problem no restaurant on land ever has to face. The entire kitchen is floating, and the sea does not sit still. When a carrier pushes through heavy weather, the whole ship rolls and pitches, and so do the kettles of boiling liquid, the loaded trays, the knives, and the cooks holding them. In rough seas, equipment gets strapped down, non-slip mats go on the decks, and the crew learns to work braced against a floor that is tilting under them. And they do it under real pressure because these cooks come from every background imaginable. Some were trained chefs before they enlisted, others had never so much as boiled water, and all of them have to be brought up to speed fast. But there is a reason the Navy pours so much into this. Because feeding the crew isn't really about calories. It's about morale. Food is morale. Ask anyone who has served, and they'll tell you the same thing. When you're stuck on a steel ship 1,000 miles from home for months on end, the meal is the best part of the day. It's the one small taste of normal life. So the cooks fight to make it count. Menus are rotated so nothing gets stale. There's Taco Tuesday. Sailors who have a birthday at sea get treated to prime rib or lobster, sometimes with a tablecloth and real glasses. And on Thanksgiving and Christmas, the galley turns out a full holiday feast, so that being away from family stings just a little less. Some cooks put on Mongolian grill nights, or dishes from whatever part of the world the ship happens to be sailing through. Anything to break the monotony of month after month at sea. There's an old saying about this. An army may march on its stomach, but a navy sails on it. Which raises one last question. How does all that food even reach a ship in the middle of the ocean? Resupply at sea. This might be the most astonishing part of the whole story. A carrier can stay at sea for months without ever pulling into port, so the food has to come to it while it is moving. Every week to 10 days, a supply ship pulls up right alongside the carrier, the two vessels matching speed just 100 or so feet apart in open ocean, and they string steel cables between them. The Navy calls it an underway replenishment, one of the trickiest and most dangerous things two big ships can do, threading cables across the gap while steaming side by side at speed. Then, riding along those cables, come the pallets, 400,000 to 1,000,000 pounds of food in a single resupply, swinging across the water from one moving ship to the other. Sometimes helicopters do the heavy lifting instead, ferrying load after load down onto the deck, a vertical replenishment in Navy shorthand. And all of it vanishes below into a maze of dry storerooms and refrigerated and frozen compartments. The pantry of a floating city, stretching through compartment after compartment deep in the hull. Watching over all of it is a sailor with one of the oldest nicknames in the Navy, the Jack of the Dust, a name handed down from the flour-dusted bread rooms of the old sailing ships. He's the keeper of the storerooms, and it's his job to track that mountain of food and break it back out day after day, so the galley never runs dry. That's where the cooks pull it, meal after meal after meal, until the next supply ship appears on the horizon. And by the time the last tray from mid-rats is scraped clean and the giant ovens finally cool, it's nearly 3 in the morning again, which means somewhere down in that galley, under the humming lights, the breakfast crew is already tying on their aprons and lighting the grills. Because a carrier can outgun any Navy on Earth. But the one battle it fights every hour of every day, with no break and no ceasefire, is the next meal.